Hey everyone, tonight we're drifting back to a quiet studio in late 15th century Italy. The light is low, the candles are a little smoky, paper is expensive, ink stains everything, and the man at the desk is writing backwards, because, of course he is. Settle in, dim the lights. Let your shoulders drop. We're going to leaf through a set of pages that were never meant for us, and that's half the charm. Leonardo da Vinci kept notebooks the way some people keep kitchen drawers. Everything's in there. Spools of thread, stray keys, and a surprisingly detailed sketch of a machine designed to terrify horses. We'll take it slowly. Leonardo liked slow. He liked watching water swirl around a stone, the way a strand of hair shadows the curve of a cheek. How a bird moves, not just wings, but a whole vocabulary of muscle and air. In the margins, he would remind himself to look again, to measure again, to ask the locksmith about the shape of a tooth on a gear. It's not a diary. It's not a treatise. It's a brain in paper form, doing laps. Leonardo's notebooks have the kind of reputation that makes them sound like a conspiracy theory wrapped in vellum, secrets, codes, hidden knowledge. And yes, there are secrets. Some are obvious, like his mirror writing. Others are more subtle, the way he hides jokes in solemn lists, the way a grocery note sits beside a drawing of a human heart, as if dinner and mortality were naturally filed next to each other, which for him they were. Most of what we call Leonardo's notebooks were never bound by him into proper volumes. He left thousands of loose sheets and little pocketbooks. After he died in 1519, his student Francesco Melzi tried to gather the papers, and only some survived the slow disaster that follows genius around inheritance squabbles. Mold greedy collectors with scissors, the usual. Today, about 7,000 pages make up the fragments we know. The Codex Atlanticus in Milan, a brick of a compilation assembled in the late 1500s. The Codex Arundel in London. The Codex Foster in the V&A. The Madrid notebooks rediscovered in the 1960s in, unsurprisingly, Madrid. The Codex on the Flight of Birds up in Turin, and the Codex Leicester, which currently tours the world like a rock star that forgot to retire and is famously owned by Bill Gates. Yes, the one with the screensaver-worthy diagrams of water, eddies, and moonlight. If you look at Leonardo's script, it slants right to left. He was left-handed and wrote with a quill. Mirror writing saves your ink from smearing across your hand. It also keeps nosy apprentices from reading over your shoulder. People have proposed cleverer reasons, like deliberate obfuscation to hide dangerous ideas, or a cipher designed to trick enemies. It's possible. He did like a good riddle. But if you've ever tried to write with a quill in your non-dominant hand, you'll recognize the simple logic. It's easier this way. The fact that it also looks mysterious? A pleasant bonus when you're Leonardo and half your patrons think a flying machine is the why devil's business. He wasn't just hiding words behind a mirror. He was hiding complexity behind the domestic. Picture a page. On one corner, a careful list. Get a master of hydraulics. Obtain the measurement of the sun promised me. Ask Benedetto Portinari about the method for moving the column. Find the skull. Next to it, a neat sketch of a gear train. Then, a quick doodle of an eye, a few eyelashes, a soft shadow. A note about the shape of the eyelid, nothing too labored, as if the world were a thing you glance at once and remember forever. His to-do lists are charmingly human. He reminds himself to buy a mirror, to get socks, to ask a bookbinder about a certain glue. He writes down a joke. He jots the name of a new pigment supplier. Then he pivots into metaphysics. What is the nature of seeing? Does the eye send rays or receive them? The brain, not the heart, is the seat of the senses, he writes. In a line so casual, it could be mistaken for a shopping item. Some of his secrets are craft secrets. Painters used to keep tricks close. Which oil, which varnish, how long to wait between layers, how to grind a stubborn blue that clumps when you breathe on it. In his notes, Leonardo leaves the breadcrumbs of his technique when he isn't changing his mind. He tells us to paint in thin veils, to let forms emerge like the moon through mist. This is the famous sfumato, that smoky gradation you see on the Mona Lisa's cheek. He didn't invent it from nothing. No one does, but he refined it like a man who has nothing else to do but stare at shadows until they cooperate. He describes the pyramid of light that enters the eye. He charts how color changes in air thick with moisture. The painter must be a mathematician, he says more than once, because seeing is geometry by another name. Then he veers into the pettiest kind of studio drama, because perfectionists have apprentices, and apprentices have sticky fingers. There's a page where he records the arrival of a boy named Giacomo, later known as Sallo. Giacomo is 10. On day 2, Leonardo writes, "The boy stole money." On day 3, more money. Soon after, he took a silver stylus. He calls him a liar, a thief, and a glutton. And then he keeps him around for decades, because of course he does. Sallo, with his beautiful curls and beautiful talent for mischief, became companion, model, nuisance, and by the end, beneficiary of more than one painting. The notebooks don't give us a romantic novella. They give us something more interesting, that human muddle where annoyance and affection sit at the same table, stealing each other's bread. There are jokes, and they hide more than they show. Leonardo composed prophecies, riddles dressed as visions of the future. Men will speak to one another from the most distant countries, he wrote, which turns out to be letter writing. Men will walk underwater. That's a metaphor for fish. Creatures will be seen on the earth who will always be fighting one with another, with great loss and frequent death on either side. That would be saws. It's court entertainment with a sly edge, the kind you can read aloud while the Duke laughs and no one realizes you're gently mocking them for. Believing everything is apocalyptic when, Really, it's carpentry. The anatomy drawings, this is where the notebooks stop being charming and start being quietly seismic. Leonardo dissected humans and animals, often at night, often in winter, when bodies keep better. He dissected at least 30 corpses, perhaps more. He fitted ox brains with wax to cast the ventricles. He noted the sinuses in the aorta, those eddies at the base of the heart valves that modern cardiologists like to pretend they discovered just yesterday. He drew an old man, skin like paper, and wrote a long, calm note about how he had lived for more than a century and died without any sign of disease. Other than weakness, he mapped the muscles of the neck, the shoulder, the uncanny complexity of a hand. He tried to understand how we cry. He wondered if laughter is a mechanical thing or something stubbornly immaterial. He knew the heart is a muscle. He knew the mandible is one bone, not two, and was irritated that anyone had ever thought otherwise. Were there errors? Naturally. He wasn't a time traveler from a future medical school. In one famous sheet, he draws a fetus curled inside a uterus that looks suspiciously like that of a cow, complete with horn shape. It's an honest mistake of comparative anatomy. He swapped a model when a human specimen was hard to come by. The notebooks preserved the mistake and the correction, and the fact that he kept going. It's not the omniscient voice of later science. It's a person learning in public, except the public was just him. There are lists of catastrophes too. Leonardo loved a deluge. You see pages of storm drawings, curls of water smashing rocks, trees bent like penitent saints, an entire world washed clean, or at least wiped, interestingly. It's part physics, part romantic gloom. He was fascinated by the scale of nature, and by how human works look very small when nature remembers she can breathe. He wrote about fossil shells found on mountains, not as signs of a global flood in recent memory, as tradition insisted, but as traces of old seas that rose and fell over ages. The mountains are old. The planet is busy. Water is patient. He didn't phrase it as a manifesto. He drew some shells, wrote a few lines, and drew the river again in the Codex Leicester, the one that has made more public appearances than some minor royals. Leonardo played with light and water, the way a child plays with both at once, which is to say, with their sleeves wet. He explains the pale glow on the dark side of the crescent moon, the light we sometimes call the Da Vinci glow, as earthlight, the reflection of sunlight bouncing off our planet onto the moon. It's right. He talks about why the sky is blue, not because the air is colored, but because of the way light scatters in a body of air dense with tiny particles and moisture. He wanders into geology and out again, leaving a trail of correctness that will only be appreciated by people who come much later, wearing lab coats, and then he folds in something silly. Because balance is important. In one pocket notebook, he writes, "Describe the tongue of the woodpecker." That's all. No further context. Just that. Apparently, today we're going to look into woodpecker tongues. which, for the record, are extraordinarily long, barbed, and able to wrap around the skull to absorb shock. Leonardo would have enjoyed knowing that modern specialists finally answered him. He might also have asked if they needed a better hobby. The Madrid codices, lost in a library for a few centuries, like a sock behind a dresser, add another layer to the mechanics. Gears, pulleys, screwjacks, hoists. He diagrammed machine tools, lathes, devices to cut threads. A kind of mechanical reasoning that lets you build other machines in a cascade. He was not the first to love gears, but he loved them like a painter loves light, for what they can do and what they look like doing it. He sketched a differential way to add or subtract motion 2 centuries early. He drew cranes that could lift obelisks, bridges for armies on the move, and the still famous armored vehicle that waddles across the page like a metal tortoise that's had a heavy lunch. Would it work? Not as drawn. He arranged the gears in a way that cancels itself out, which is either an error or a polite, please don't actually make this and run someone over. You pick. Leonardo liked to brag to warlords about the machines he could design, and then, when given an actual battle, liked to stage a pageant instead. On the page, though, everything is plausible, edged, slightly theatrical. This is the same man who conducted elaborate theatrical productions for the courts of Milan and later for the French. He built moving planets for a pageant, heavens that rose and fell. He designed costumes with wings. He worked out how to drop a curtain of stars with a rope hidden under a stage. And yes, he wrote the shopping list sheets of orders for fabric, pigments, candles, bits of tin and wire, a whole little economy of spectacle. He had a knack for being put in charge of everything at once. Painting, engineering, theater, a giant horse statue that never got cast because someone melted the bronze into cannons, a canal scheme, a favor for a friend, an anatomical lesson after dinner. The notebooks are where the log jam spills out into lists, where you watch him try to turn a hurricane of obligations into a neat page. People sometimes read the mirror writing and the mix of topics and come away with the romance of a man hiding from the world. It's less dramatic. He was hiding from interruption. He's making spaces he can move inside. He writes to himself, "Tell me if I ever made a single thing." He did, but he rarely signed off. He left the treatise on painting for a student to assemble from scraps after he died. He promised a book on water, a book on the human body, a book on light and shade, and then wandered happily through each, taking notes, drawing, and famously not finishing. We like to psychoanalyze this. Procrastinator, perfectionist, neurodivergent. The notebooks give us a less tidy answer. He was interested. And the world, by inconvenient design, is infinite. And then the petty life continues in the margins. He keeps track of money owed and money lent, and notes which patrons are slow to pay, which is most of them. He records the gift of a cloak, as if the warmth of it needed to be preserved in ink. He notes a lawsuit. He files it next to a design for a flying machine and a recipe for polishing mirrors. He scolds a student, not with words we can hear, but with a correction drawn in red chalk over a clumsy sketch of small mercy, a quiet teaching. He scolds himself, too. There's a line, "You do wrong. It is to blame yourself and not others." It's not a motivational poster. It's the voice of a man who knows that if he had slept less, he would have drawn more, but would also have been worse at measuring. Rivers. Some secrets are embarrassingly ordinary. He writes down what he ate. He writes that he bought 2 braccia of cloth for new clothes. He lists shoes, a pin, the price of a chicken, the cost of a funeral. He was not poor. He had rich patrons and a certain effortless dignity, but he wasn't secure either. He had to remind himself to send receipts and to collect them. He was, in other words, a freelancer. The notebooks are full of freelancer things. Draft letters to patrons, including a famous one to Ludovico Sforza, where he offers expertise in war machines for 9 paragraphs before casually mentioning he can also paint a bit. This is called knowing your audience. If you want genuine secrecy, it's in the way he tucked difficult things into plain sight. He writes, for example, about the circulation of blood, not as a grand theory, but as a set of experiments. He pours water through glass models of heart valves. He suspends a pig's heart in an apparatus and watches vortices form. He sketches the eddies. He notes how the flow closes the valve leaflets gently rather than slamming them shut, preventing damage. It's the kind of observation that disappears if you blink. He draws it so you won't. He doesn't claim to have solved the body. He's just mapping a swirl. The notebooks also hold a record of things he didn't say. In 1476, when he was in his early 20s, anonymous accusations of sodomy were made against him and several others in Florence. He was arrested and then released. Charges were dropped. He never writes about it. Not a line, but perhaps the private voice we hear so clearly in other contexts. The jokes, the careful science, the fussy shopping rembers. Privacy was valuable. He built it with backward script and soft, hard to read, Tuscan, and a habit of filing feelings under work. He wrote with immense curiosity about animals. He designed flying machines after reading the air as if it were a second ocean. He watched birds, the way they bank, how they locked their wings at the top of a glide. He designed the ornithopter, essentially a set of elaborate bird wings you strap to your own very unimpressive human chest. Was it ever going to get off the ground? Not powered by one person, no. But the notes on lift and drag are thoughtful. In his Codex on the flight of birds, he comes close to modern aerodynamic insight and then stops, as if remembering he has to finish painting a ceiling ornament for a duchess and can't be bothered to invent the Wright brothers before. Lunch, a favorite page for many of us, is Vitruvian. Man the man in the circle and square. It's in a notebook, of course. Leonardo is testing the Roman architect Vitruvius's ideas about perfect proportions. He measures. He notes how far the arms extend, how the span of the arms matches height, how the navel sits in the circle. It's clinical and poetic at once. He's not drawing an ideal man. He's drawing a theory that claims the body is a unit of measure, and he's poking it with a compass. The drawing looks serene. The notes are slightly skeptical. The embarrassment of later centuries is realizing that what we thought was mystical is actually practical. It's the kind of practical that wears a nice robe. He also liked to record little moral fables. A stone complains that it was separated from its siblings, cut out of the quarry, forced to carry men's weight as a step. The step insists that it has purpose now. Leonardo is not exactly a sup, but he enjoys this sort of thing. Are we supposed to take a lesson about usefulness? Maybe, or it's just a way of talking to himself about how a person ends up doing 50 things for a duke can't decide between a castle and a party. People have rummaged the notebooks for centuries, looking for a single secret, as if there's a national treasure map somewhere that points to an underground vault of solved mysteries. The reality is more generous. The secret is that there is no secret. The pages show work. They show failure in a friendly light. They show that genius is less a sky-sent lightning bolt and more a habit of paying attention long after other people wander off. He practiced seeing. He wrote over and over a phrase you could translate as knowing how to see. That's the trick. It feels occult because most of us would rather guess than look. If you hold one of his sheets under a strong light, you see the indentations of the pen, the tiny tremors where a line began and then was abandoned, a ghost of an earlier idea under a new one. On one famous sheet, you can see that he drew a horse's leg, changed his mind about the way the tendon attaches, and then drew it again, slightly differently, and then moved on without triumph. That's the whole mood. The notebook is a safe place to be wrong. At the end of his life in France, he willed most of his manuscripts to Francesco Melzi. Some paintings, depending on which inventory you believened up with Salo, the same liar, thief, and glutton who had grown into an elegant man with a gift for expensive tastes. The notebooks dispersed. Melzi's descendants treated them like a trunk of old clothes. Collectors cut them up into pleasing sheets, framed a few, lost a few more. By the time modern editors began to assemble them, the sequence was gone. We have, essentially, a jigsaw puzzle missing half its box. It's okay. Leonardo did not mind if you read page 2 before page 1. He likely did that himself. So, what secrets did he hide? He hid curiosity in plain view. He hid a scientific method before the phrase existed. He hid jokes among machines of war. He hid tenderness for old men with thin skin. He hid a careful understanding of the heart beneath a line about buying shoes. He hid the extraordinary inside the ordinary. The way a painter hides bone under skin with beige paint and faith. Let's drift. Just a little to one last sheet before we put the papers away. It's a sketch of water spiraling behind a rock. He labels the eddies and diagrams how the main current breaks, how the small currents fold back on themselves in little collars of froth. There's no patron for this, no paycheck, no urgent castle to fortify. He did it because it was there, because the world keeps offering itself up to anyone who is bored enough to look longer than a polite minute. That was his trick. He wrote it down backwards, so that if you wanted to read along, you had to turn the page toward a mirror, and in that reflection, see yourself looking back. We'll leave him for tonight. The tiny notes about bird tongues, the eye studies, the complaint about a boy who ate too much, the mechanical tortoise, the swelling list of things to do tomorrow that looks suspiciously like a list of things he did yesterday. The notebooks were his privacy and his performance. They were never meant for us. That's why they feel intimate, quiet, a little messy, and absolutely full. Let's drift over next time to another figure who left behind a pile of secrets written in the margins, though theirs involve more bloodlines and fewer woodpeckers. For now, breathe and let the pages close themselves. We're going to drift out across the steppe, now cool air, long grass, tents clustered like small moons around a bigger moon. Horses shift, soft and restless. A pot hangs over a low fire. People talk in the quiet way of people who live with wind. And somewhere in the center of it all is a man with too many sons, too many cousins, more in-laws than any mortal deserves, and exactly zero patience for family drama. He is, inconveniently, at the head of the largest land empire the world has ever seen, which means a single grudge at breakfast can turn into a war by dinner if you're not careful. So the question, how did Genghis Khan keep a lid on all that? Not cleanly, not forever, but remarkably well. Considering the number of people involved and the amount of fermented mare's milk, let's start softly with the concept he liked best. The household as an empire and the empire as a household. That sounds sentimental. It wasn't. It was management. In a nomadic world, power is a camp. It's people, tents, herds, carts, and the routes you travel. The Mongols called the ruler's camp the ordo. Europeans picked up the word and heard horde, which is not completely wrong. Genghis organized his family into a constellation of ordos, his own, of course, in the heartland along the Anin and Kurlan rivers. The ordo of his chief wife Bert, the camps of his other senior wives, and then the camps of his sons and brothers. Each was a little government, with officers, a treasury, household staff, and those all-important herds that were, frankly, more reliable than most humans. He liked to balance power by handing each important person both, something to love and something to lose. He assigned Appanijizaluzes, domains, and a careful pattern. His 4 sons, by Bert, became 4 pillars, even if they wobbled. Joki, the eldest, got the far western lands and the promise of more wherever the empire rolled that way. Sorghaghtani, stern and fond of rules, was planted in Central Asia. Gedai, affable and sociable, was chosen to be the next great Khan. He had the central heartlands and, crucially, the right to gather the rest. Tolui, the youngest, stayed close to home with the ancestral hearth, the base of operations, and the job of caretaker whenever the others were far away breaking something. This, you get a wing, you get a wing. And I keep the center warm arrangement worked because Genghis layered it onto a broader structure that broke old loyalties and made new ones that ran through him. He reorganized people into tens, hundreds, thousands, and 10,000s. Arban, Jagan, Mingyan, Tuman. It sounds like a counting rhyme because it is one. But it's also social engineering. Instead of letting tribes stick together and form their own power blocks, he mixed them, folded them like dough. Your commander might be a cousin, or not. The man next to you in the saddle might be from your clan, or not. What was certain is that every layer led upward to him. When he was gone, it led to the person he had designated to sit where he'd sat. He needed something to hold this web together. Enter the thing we call the Yassa. People love to imagine it as a neat code of laws bound in leather with the title embossed. It wasn't. It was more like a stack of decisions, decrees, precedents. And we do it this way now. Rules that everyone memorized because they wanted to live. Don't steal horses. Sensible. Don't take people in revenge unless ordered. Healthy. Don't kidnap women. You would think. Don't argue about politics in the tent in a way that gets us all killed. Very implied. Very essential. Genghis made it clear that the law came before kinship when kinship threatened the law, and then he set someone to guard it. After he chose Gedai as his successor, he placed Sorghaghtani in charge of upholding the Yassa. The stern older brother becomes the empire's chief rule enforcer. It gave Sorghaghtani prestige, an outlet for his temperament, and, perhaps most importantly, a job that wasn't snipe at the new great Khan. The family itself was not small. Massive is polite. Genghis had many wives and concubines. The wives were not merely decorative. Each senior wife, especially Bert, had her own ordo and her own network of clients and servants. Think of each queen as a CEO of a regional branch office that also manufactures reality. They managed logistics, issued orders in their own name, and dispensed gifts and punishments. People came to them for justice. They arranged marriages. They knew which cousin had a drinking problem and which herder could be trusted with the white mares in spring. The empire ran on fast horses and good information. The queens were a postal service and a human resources department in one. Soft-voiced package. The daughters were policy instruments. This sounds unkind. It's accurate. Genghis married his daughters two powerful men on the steppe and in the borderlands, and then, in a twist that many of those men learned too late, he gave the daughters actual authority. The husband might wear a crown, but the daughter ran the show. He used this to plant loyal rulers among the Ongod, the Oyat, and other neighbors. It created a ring of in-law territory skuda ties in Mongol terms round the core. Your ruler is Genghis's son-in-law. Your queen is Genghis's daughter. It is suddenly difficult to be disloyal without also ruining Thanksgiving. There's also the small matter of joki. We have to say it, and we will do it quietly, because the secret history of the Mongols speaks quietly here too. Bert was captured early in their marriage by the Merkit and held for months before being rescued. She returned pregnant. She insisted, and Genghis insisted, that the child was his. Joki was raised as the eldest son. It should have been simple. It wasn't Sorghaghtani. Never let go of the doubt. He needled. He used phrases like that person when referring to his brother, which is rude in any language. It festered until it mattered. Genghis, who was not sentimental, but did appreciate a quiet life, realized that making Joki the great Khan would split the family. Making Sorghaghtani the great Khan would split it differently. So he picked Gadai, the one with a talent for getting along with people. He called the brothers in and made them promise to obey. Then he gave Sorghaghtani the job of judging, and Joki the west, and Tolui the home camp. And he himself continued being the gravitational force that kept them in the same solar system. Joki died before his father, probably in 1225 or thereabouts. The quarrel ended, at least in the present tense. But the western lands still needed a Jokid to run them. So Batu, Joki's son, stepped forward later and made the steps toward Russia his playground. If you wondered why later Mongol politics looked like three-dimensional chess with extra horses, it's because the family tree kept branching while remembering it had been an axe. Genghis also controlled his family by making it bigger in a way that diluted blood and sharpened loyalty. He adopted, or more precisely, he folded people into the household until they were family, because acting like family is often more important than being family. Shigi Kutuk is a good example, captured as an infant from an enemy, raised by Genghis's mother, Ellen, and then appointed chief judge, Diola Yarguchi, with the authority to administer justice across the empire. He wasn't the Khan's blood, but he was the Khan's man, and his position balanced the influence of the brothers and sons. If you're noticing a theme counterbalance, no one gets to sit alone on a hill here, right? He kept a similar check on his half-brothers, though. Cheerful murderers' row of Kasar, Belgati, and Kashunmen of talent and energy, who might have been dangerous if they had been made to sit and think too long. He gave them commands. He let them win glory against enemies. He gave them herds to manage, people to protect, and a certain scope that satisfied pride without tempting them to rearrange the family tree. Here is 1,000 households, he says in the sources. Or here is a tome and a gift that's also a tether. There is the quiet engineering of marriages. He married into the Kondrabert's people and kept up the habit. Marriages to that tribe tied him to a maternal clan that would support his children. He married sons to women from important tribes. Daughters went out to bind the periphery. Widowed princesses were kept in the network under levirate. Marriage, being married to a brother or a cousin of the late husband, not always romantic, but very good for continuity. Nothing like turning potential in-laws into actual in-laws to prevent mischief. He also created a way to govern absence. The empire was a moving thing. So were the men who ruled parts of it. Campaigning took years. While the great Khan, or a princely son, was off rearranging maps, the queens ruled at home with seals, scribes, and a fixed set of permissions. They controlled supplies and messengers, welcomed envoys, and gave orders. This meant the father and sons could leave without the center falling apart, because the center had multiple centers. If one person made a stupid decision, someone else had the authority to make a smarter one. And if everyone made stupid decisions, there was always the Yassa to hide behind while the tea boiled. People enjoy retelling the harsh scenes. Genghis executing a troublesome half-brother as a young man, punishing a disloyal kinsman with quiet efficiency. Those did happen, but just as important and far less dramatic were the conversations. In a famous passage, Genghis invites his sons to criticize themselves. Not a happy round of self-improvement, more like therapy run by a warlord. Sorghaghtani is too rigid. Gedai drinks more than is ideal, but also more than is unusual. Tolway is brave and a little reckless. They speak, and he agrees, and then he sets jobs accordingly. You do not put the rigid man where flexibility is required. You do not put the reckless man in charge of the pantry. You do not put the charming one in the place where charm is optional. It's practical, like everything else now. The postal system. Not exactly a family measure, except it absolutely is when your family operates at the scale of a country. Genghis built out a network of stations. The Yamso messages could move fast on fresh horses. It was governance as pulse. It also acted like arteries between the ordos. A queen could write to a son 1,000 miles away. A commander could send an inventory to the central treasury. News of births, deaths, and ill-advised feasts traveled at a speed that made gossip relevant to policy, which is the dream of all families and the nightmare of most. He liked to give gifts in a way that doubled as surveillance. A Pesa tablet or badge that granted the bearer authority to requisition horses. Food beds looked like honor and functioned like a tracking device before GPS. If you had one, you could move. If you abused it, everyone at the stations knew. The empire relied on face, and the Pesa put a face to a name. Again, you're seeing the pattern, family, but accountable family. There's also a difference worth keeping in mind between blood and the thing the Mongols called the golden lineage. That lineage was more than DNA. It was a corporate identity. The Altan Urug, golden family, was a brand with rights and expectations. You could challenge the person wearing the crown. You did not challenge the idea of the family wearing it. That idea kept cousins from turning a one-time fight into a permanent break, at least for a while. You could hate your brother and still accept that he is a container for the authority you believe in more than him. The dynastic oddities did not vanish just because everyone agreed on the logo. There were petty meltdowns. Sorghaghtani's attitude toward Joki wasn't just rude. It produced real consequences. Army commands had to be adjusted so they didn't have to work together more than necessary. Later, when Gedei's son Gyok and Tolui's son Mungi were both old enough to have opinions, family meetings started to resemble those holiday dinners where someone brings up old grievances before dessert. The glue that Genghis left law marriage, distributed authority, worked as long as everyone pretended to prioritize it. After he was gone, the pretense got harder. There is a story worth a gentle retelling, because it makes the point about queens and control beautifully. Sorghaghtani Beki, the wife of Tolui and daughter-in-law to Genghis, was a Karaite noblewoman, a Christian by upbringing, and a master at quiet competence. After Genghis's death, and after Gedi's short and increasingly tipsy reign, the empire needed a few adults. Sorghaghtani raised her sons Mangi, Kublai, Hulagu, Rik, Bey with a mixture of education and strategy, then steered them toward power without a lot of shouting. She negotiated, wrote letters, maintained relations with merchants and clerics, and made sure that when the moment came, her sons were seen as solutions rather than problems. If you're curious how Genghis kept the family from exploding after he personally couldn't stand over it anymore, the answer is that he arranged things so that women like Sorghaghtani, Kudan would do it for him, Gedei's widow. Trudging Khatun did much the same in her own way, though more aggressively. On her husband's death, she assumed the regency, reshuffled officials with enthusiasm, and pushed her son Gyok onto the throne. It was not elegant, it was effective. Genghis had put the idea in place. A queen's ordo is a government. The queens took him at his word, depending on your angle. This is either a sign of enlightened policy or the reason family dinners became more complicated. And then there's the famous genetic rumor that the modern world keeps repeating to itself with a mixture of awe and discomfort, that a measurable percentage of men in a vast arc of Eurasia carry a white chromosome lineage that likely originated around the time and place of Genghis Khan and spread in a pattern that looks like a map of Mongol conquest. It's plausible. It's not provable in the sense of we can swab his grave and check, but it fits what we know about victorious elites and their enthusiasm for fatherhood. If true, it's a biological footnote to the administrative fact we've been wading through. He didn't just have a large family. He kept making it larger in every direction. He also kept it busy. Nothing controls a quarrelsome relative like a project in the opposite direction. Genghis sent sons, west, east, and everywhere in between. He assigned sieges and pursuits, put them under capable non-family commanders when necessary, and made sure they had a stake in the results. Success meant loot and glory for the branch. Failure meant an awkward ride home past a lot of people who took notes. Tolui, for example, led the campaign in northern China with horrifying efficiency, and then, later, drank a lethal cup in a ritual designed to heal his brother Geday's illness, one of those episodes where medicine, sacrifice, and politics commute. Was it an actual cure? No. Did it solve other problems? Also no. But it demonstrated the extreme version of the principle. The family served the family, even to the point of theatrical death. Consider the small domestic controls too. Genghis liked the kind of order that starts with good lists. He had inventories of horses, carts, and weapons. He had officers responsible for each thing. He kept track of who had eaten, who hadn't, who had been paid, and whose turn it was to ride with the baggage instead of the vanguard. He distributed plunder according to a formula that was predictable and therefore less infuriating. If you remove surprise and perceived unfairness from an environment, you lower the temperature. Family conflict thrives on uncertainty. Dad always favors you. No, he doesn't. He follows a chart. Charts are very soothing. The courtiers also helped. If you picture a mass of cousins jostling for position without any adult supervision, you miss the functionaries who made it possible to be civilized in a felt tent. Scribes wrote the orders. Interpreters managed multilingual chaos. Merchants extended credit. Judges like Shigi Kutuk and administrators with good memories held the pretense together that this was all somehow reasonable. Genghis selected these people from outside the family, often enough to prevent any one branch from owning the bureaucracy. An in-law might sit with a Turkic scribe while a Chinese administrator explained how to collect taxes without turning the population into dust and regret. Everyone became necessary to everyone else. It wasn't all grand design. Some of it was instinct honed by a disaster. As a boy and young man, Temujin, the future Genghis, had watched his family be abandoned by their tribe after his father's death. He had starved, scrounged, and improvised. He killed a half-brother in a fight over food. None of that recommends him as a gentle uncle, but it does explain his preference for systems that don't let a single accident destroy a household. He learned early that a family must be something you assemble every day, with rules, with food, with shared purpose. When he had power, he made that a policy. And yes, sometimes he relied on old methods. If a relative became inconvenient in a way that couldn't be negotiated away, an accident could happen. A sudden death in a camp where horses kick, fires burn, and enemies exist in everyone's imagination is not exactly unheard of. But Genghis seems to have preferred to use structural pressure rather than personal elimination. He aimed to make rebellion costly and loyalty profitable, and then to tie both into lines of marriage, law, and work that were difficult to escape without tearing your own tent. By the time he died in 1227, quietly, with the manner of a man whose camp is in order, even if the neighbors are not, he had left a machine that could function. It was not immortal. No empire is. But it functioned long enough for his grandchildren to carve out the Jochid realm in the west, the Sorghaghtani Khanate in Central Asia, the Ilkhanate in Persia, and the Yuan in China. It functioned long enough for a set of royal women to keep the tents upright while the men argued. It functioned long enough for the family to keep calling itself a family, even when it protested otherwise. If we want the short answer to the question, how did he control his massive family? It's this: by never relying on just one thing. He used law, marriages, gifts, hostages, adoption, jobs, geography, and gossip. And he put more than one adult in every room. He planned for absence and for misbehavior. He assumed people would be themselves and assigned tasks accordingly. He mixed loyalty until it was a paste you couldn't separate without a knife. He created a world where the easiest way to be important was to be useful, which is about as good a rule for dealing with relatives as anything else. Let's stay here a minute longer in the camp at night. You can hear a horse snort. Someone snores. Somewhere, a scribe is still awake, trimming a quill by lamplight. And a queen is speaking in a voice so calm it could put out a fire. A courier ties his peza into his belt. A young prince tries to remember whether he's supposed to ride east or west in the morning. The stars go on being stars. The tents rustle, and in a neat little circle, the household breathes in and out under a law that pretends to be simple, and a family that pretends to be happy. It worked until it didn't, but for a while, it was a kind of art. We'll drift along next into another palace of relatives and their delicate disasters. There will be fewer horses, more wigs. For now, let the wind settle, and think kindly of the genius it takes to make an argument travel at the speed of a horse, and then keep pace with it. Tonight, we're drifting down the Nile, toward a palace that smells like myrrh and beeswax, where the floors are cool, the lamps are gold, and the mirrors are bronze, because of course they are. Cleopatra, the seventh Philopator, last of the Ptolemies, had an empire to charm, and a dynasty to pretend was fine. That takes strategy, language, and let's be honest, a very deliberate routine. We should start gently by admitting that Cleopatra's beauty is mostly an essay in misdirection. Plutarch, who was not there, but liked to sound as if he had been, says her looks alone were not incomparable, but her presence, her voice, her wit, those were devastating. Translation: she won by atmosphere. She composed her day like perfume, layers that arrive one by one. In the morning, she's an Egyptian queen with kohl that could stare down the sun. At noon, a Hellenistic intellectual with a scroll and 6 languages. At night, a scent moving on the breeze before her barge is even in view. Routine isn't just skincare. It's politics you can apply with a brush. Let's wake with her, softly. The palace is Alexandria cosmopolitan, noisy, crowded with scholars and traders, and a little sticky with sea air. Cleopatra's household wakes early. The sun hits the colonnades. There's a basin with cool water perfumed lightly with rose petals, or perhaps a pinch of natron Egypt's favorite mineral salt from the Wadi Natrondas, evolved to make a simple cleanser. Natron is a mild alkali. It cuts oils, lifts sweat from a sultry night, and doubles as a deodorant. The Egyptians had been using it since forever to wash bodies, and regrettably, to preserve them too. It does both jobs well. Start simple. Rinse the sleep away. The queen does not need to be embalmed before breakfast. An attendant rubs her skin with oil, not heavy olive oil, which can sit on the skin in that I am a salad way, but something finer. Egyptian perfumers loved ben oil from moringa, Bolano's oil from the desert date, and almond oil, all good carriers for scent, all capable of making skin gleam without turning a woman into a torch. A light massage with oil wakes the circulation and, crucially, sets the stage for a day spent in dry air and bright light. Cleopatra did not have sunscreen, but she had common sense. Layer 1. Protection. If she's following a truly Egyptian morning, there's a little kyphi on the brazier. Kyphi, or capit, is the famous temple incense honeyed, resinous, wine sweet, with notes of myrrh, juniper, cinnamon, raisins, frankincense, and other things that make a room feel like it has expensive thoughts. The recipe appears in hieroglyphic temple texts and in Greek writers who could never resist listing ingredients. Burned at dusk, kyphi was said to soothe sleep. Taken in small quantities as a syrup, it was thought to settle the breath. Used in the morning, a lighter version sets a tone, queenly, slightly medicinal, definitely not accidental. Now the face. We picture Cleopatra with that lacquered black eyeliner, and we are, for once, not entirely wrong. Kohl was non-negotiable. For Egyptian eyes, that meant galenoled, sulfide, ground to a fine powder and mixed with fat or oil into a paste. Malachite, a green copper carbonate, was also traditional, especially in earlier periods. Ptolemaic women still used it for a green wash on the lids when the mood asked for a goddess of Nile reeds. There's also powdered azurite, and if you're very wealthy and slightly ridiculous, a hint of lapis, though no one in their right mind grinds lapis every morning. The kohl wasn't just pretty. It reduced glare in Egypt's hard light, and this is the part modern scientists enjoy bragging about. Its carefully prepared lead salt stimulated a tiny immune response that discouraged eye infections. The Egyptians had figured out by trial and error how to make their eyeliner medicinal. Cleopatra did not write a peer-reviewed paper. She wore it. Application was a quiet ritual. An attendant dips a slim coal stickwood bone or glass to the paste and draws it along the inner rim. The effect is immediate. The eye goes from human to icon. A line extends slightly at the corners, not the sharp wing of a 21st century tutorial, more the soft almond that makes a person look as if they've slept well and made good decisions. Cleopatra valued decisions. Sleep was optional. Eyebrows matter. Greek fashion tended toward a strong brow. Roman satirists make jokes about women painting theirs to meet in the middle, which tells you two things. Unibrows were considered sensual, and Roman satirists were very brave in the abstract. Cleopatra could darken her brows with soot mixed with oil, or with charred date pits. Plucking was standard. Tweezers existed. So did patience. If she wanted drama, a little extra soot unites the space above the nose knot, cartoonish. Just a whisper of shadow that reads as intensity in lamplight. Skin tone is where identity gets political. Classical Greek noble pallor and Egyptian sun-warmed gold belong to different aesthetics. Cleopatra lived at their intersection and used both. For a Greek-facing day in the library, or with embassy envoys, she could choose a pale base chalk and white lead were known, though dangerous. And more likely, she'd use a thin wash of chalky clay with oil to soften it, then a touch of red at the cheeks from red ochre or alkanet root. For an Egyptian temple day, she could lean into warmth, a gold-toned wash from yellow ochre, a dusting of crushed ochre mixed with fat, a polished glow from oil. Either way, she avoided the caked-on Roman ceruse that later centuries adored. It cracks. The queen did not crack. Cheeks and lips get color from the same basket. Red ochre iron oxide, ground fine and blended with oil or gum. Arabic gives a reliable, earthy red. Madder root lends a pinker tone. Kermes, the Mediterranean scale insect, was pricier and brighter. It stains a deep crimson that clangs through a banquet like a rumor. Cleopatra had access to all three. She also had the sense to go sheer in the heat. There's a difference between alive and melting. She chose alive. Hair next. And here we step into the politics again. Cleopatra's coin portraits show the Hellenistic melon style, hair parted down the middle, drawn back in neat, curved segments like the ribs of a melon, tied into a bun at the nape and crowned with a slender diadema white ribbon marking royalty. It's a practical style in Alexandria's breeze, and it says Greek queen in a glance. For ritual, especially as Isis, she could wear the Egyptian Hathor wiglong, heavy, with a vulture headdress or sun disk in official art. A queen's day toggled between images. The hairdresser and the wig keeper were, therefore, not scenery. They were policy. Hair needed care in that climate. Oils again, a little bin oil to control frizz, a touch of sesame or almond for shine. Perfumers made hair oils that were scents in their own right. Susanum, a lily-based perfume. Cyprinum, from henna flowers. Metopian, a favorite blend, heavy with myrrh and cinnamon. And Mendesian, famous across the Mediterranean, resinous and deep, made in the Nile Delta town of Mendes with Bolano's oil as its base. If you can smell the queen before you see her, you're already half persuaded. Perfume wasn't a single note. Cleopatra, if she was smartened, she was slayered, a resin at the skin, something floral in the hair, a lighter citrus or herb blend on the garments. Alexandria was the Sephora of antiquity, but with better scrolls. Glassblowing had come into its own right around her time, which meant delicate unguent bottles joined the traditional alabaster jars. In some settings, she could go theatrical, those famous perfume cones you see in Egyptian banquet art, little wax towers that melt scent down the hair through the evening. Whether they were common in her day is debated. What's certain is that the idea of fragrance that arrives slowly was very much her style. Consider Tarsus. Plutarch describes her sailing to meet Antony on a barge with purple sails, oars of silver and air so perfumed that the people ran to the river before they saw the boat. That's not hygiene. That's strategy with top notes, hands, nails, and the quiet details. Henna stains the nails a warm reddish brown and has done so in Egypt for millennia. It says prosperity, and it hides a multitude of minor injuries sustained by a person who actually picks things up. The cuticles get oil. The palms get a light scrub with natron and ground pumice. Rings do the rest and do not have to be subtle. We're past subtle. Body hair gently now. The Egyptian preference was clean skin. Women removed hair from arms, legs, and elsewhere with a mix of methods: tweezers, razors, waxing with melted beeswax and resin spread on linen strips, and pastes of quicklime and orpiment, arsenic, sulfide that dissolve the hair if you don't leave them on long enough to dissolve you. Greek medical writers preserved recipes for silithrum, a depilatory paste that was effective and, shall we say, memorable. Cleopatra lived at a time and in a place where all of these were available. The royal skin would have been the testing ground for what worked and what did not ruin an afternoon. Picture a room with good ventilation, 2 steady-handed attendants, and a queen who knows the exact number of minutes between smooth and regret. Teeth and breath were not an afterthought. Egyptian tooth powders were practical. Crushed rock salt, natron, dried mint, perhaps a little iris, ground fine. There's a later papyrus that lists a formula close enough to peppermint baking soda to make dentists nostalgic. A rinse of wine and myrrh was common among Greek elites. Chewing mastic resin from the island of Chios freshens the mouth and tightens gums. Cleopatra liked conversation. Conversation likes mastic. As for the myth of the milk bath donkey milk, in particularly lavish tellings, we can file it under stories that sound expensive and therefore true. Pliny and other Roman writers attribute daily donkey milk baths to Poppaea Sabina, Nero's famously moisturized wife, complete with a traveling herd. Cleopatra gets the credit in later imagination because she's the woman everyone enjoys imagining, bathing in anything. Donkey milk does contain lactic acid, a mild chemical exfoliant. Honey is a humectant. Oil seals it in. Did Cleopatra bathe in milk regularly? Maybe for effect, sometimes in a scene designed to be remembered by a general. Did she bathe? Absolutely, in perfumed water with natron oils and flowers. Because Alexandria had plumbers and she was not a martyr. Midday touch-ups were an art disguised as ease. A servant with a small case alabaster pots nested in a tray, a glass vial of scent, a kohl stick, a mirror polished to insult the sunlight follows at a polite distance. Heat melts color. Oil drinks light. A little dab under the eyes, a press of color at the mouth, a breath of scent, and charisma keeps working. You don't want people to notice the maintenance. You want them to notice that you remain persuasive at 3 in the afternoon. Meals were neat. Bread from wheat, fruit, olives, fish, little dishes with herbs. Too much oil in the food and the skin complains. Too much wine and the decision-making gets Roman, which is not the brand. Cleopatra could drink when required. She also knew when not to. Her daily routine protected her from her dynasty as much as from her climate. Because now we have to mention the dynasty. The Ptolemies were Macedonian Greeks who imported themselves as pharaohs and then imported the habit of marrying their siblings until the family tree looked like a wreath. Cleopatra married both of her younger brothers. First, Ptolemy the 13th, then Ptolemy the 14th. She outlived both. If her eyeliner was dark, it was not only against the sun. Her routine, the calculated hair, the deity-level scent. The specific way of dressing did double duty. It made her a goddess to Egyptians and made her legible as a queen to Greeks, while politely ignoring the fact that her husband could also be her nephew. You see why she liked incense? It covers a multitude of genealogies. What did she wear over the skin that the routine made? Linen? Mostly. Fine, almost transparent, with pleats that accept light like water accepts sky. For Roman audiences, she could add Greek-style robes or even Roman touches to signal fluency. Accessories are political. The vulture headdress and solar disk for formal cult scenes. The diadem and chiton for diplomatic afternoons. Jewelry, heavy with gold and inlaid stones, speaks in every language. You don't need to be beautiful if you are gold. Before evening, the bath again. Not a plunge so much as a floating thing, lukewarm, scented, with petals that are there to be pretty and to say, this is a person for whom petals are. Furniture. The water might be infused with marjoram or coriander. A soft linen cloth. A gentle scrub with ground barley or crushed lupin beans and exfoliants that polish without. Always oil. The skin of a queen who spends time in sun and wind must not fight the air. It must ignore the air, evening makeup shifts, lamps and torches ask for stronger lines. Shadows flatten the face. Scent carries. The cold deepens. A touch of blue or green on the lids reads well by firelight. Lips get a richer red kermes. If we're showing off, madder and ochre. If we're merely convincing. Perfume cones, if we're being explicitly Egyptian, melt slowly onto the hair at dinner, so that the queen smells a little different with every hour, warmer, heavier, closer. She understood timing. You set the sail before you need the wind. The famous pearl, trick dissolving a pearl in vinegar and drinking it to win. Bet with Antony about the most expensive banquet belongs here, not because it did anything for her skin, but because it's the same idea as a beauty routine. Costumed chemistry that makes a point. Archaeologically, the acid required to dissolve a large pearl in a single sitting would have required patience and pre-soaking, which takes the flourish out of the gesture. But if anyone could pull off stagecraft that worked by rumor alone, it was Cleopatra. And if you're Antony and you're watching a woman casually drink money, you understand she is not playing the same game as you. That is beauty as foreign policy. At night, the queen winds down. Kyphi again, because sleep needs help in palaces. A face washed nothing too harsh. Clay and water do the trick. A mask of honey and crushed lotus seeds if the day has been long. Honey calms. Lotus is symbolic and soothing. Both give her attendants something to do while they hum. The body is dusted with a fine powder ground rice or chalk. Something to take the tackiness out of oil so that sheets don't cling and people only do so when invited. Hair is unpinned, then braided loosely to keep shape and avoid tangles. The diadem is placed on its stand, a silent circlet that says this was not an accident. Somewhere on a shelf, there are little tablets stamped with the name of a perfume house. Alexandria could sell you anything that smelled like triumph. Somewhere else, a small chest holds pigments. Galena from Aswan, malachite from Sinai, ochres from the desert, kermes from tiny trembling insects who had no idea where their day would end. Nearby, mirrors bronze polished to the edge of narcissism catch lamplight and send it walking along the wall. Servants skilled, trusted, sworn to silence, put away the tools. A queen is not a one-woman show. She is a company. Some attendants are Egyptian, trained in temple cosmetics and ancient recipes. Some are Greek, with new ideas about pallor and lines. Some are Syrian or Cypriot, speaking perfume in their sleep. They argue gently about which oil behaves in humidity. They have opinions about kohl that could qualify as literature. Cleopatra listens. She hires talent. That, too, is part of the routine. If you're wondering whether she wrote any of this down, the answer is sort of. Hellenistic and Roman authors preserve recipes credited to Cleopatra for cosmetics, skin treatments, and perfumes. Are they hers? The name became shorthand for this works. So attribution is enthusiastic. But the Ptolemaic court really did breed polymaths, and Cleopatra herself dabbled in pharmacology. She befriended scholars, funded experiments, and collected formulas the way a modern might collect serums. It's not mad to imagine a shelf of wax tablets headed on ointments, with notes in Greek and Egyptian hands. Queens can be nerds. It helps the daily routine then, is a line of small decisions that say, I am exactly what you expect, and entirely more than that. It begins with natron and ends with kyphi. It passes through oil, color, light, and sound. It is never rigid. It changes with audience. Julius Caesar gets a different palate than the priesthood at Philae. Rome expects a foreign queen and finds a learned one. Memphis expects a goddess and finds one whose eyeliner has read the medical literature by accident. We should linger for a last soft minute on the image that started this. Cleopatra by a mirror in a high room. The harbor below full of ship masts, like a field of reeds. She's quiet. An attendant draws that black line along the waterline, and the eye becomes more itself. The mirror shows a face that coins will later make bolder, that statues will idealize, that poets will misremember into decadence. The actual person is neither fragile nor terrifying. She is awake. She is making a version of herself that is portable and persuasive. Some rulers build walls. She built an atmosphere, then carried it with her. Was it vanity? Of course. And discipline, and theater, and survival in a family where siblings were also rivals, and husbands were seasonal. She understood that a ruler's face is a policy document. She kept hers in order, with oil and powder, with curiosity, with a patience that makes mascara seem profound. Then she went downstairs to speak. And that, more than all the young ones in Alexandria, was the routine that worked. Let's drift, gently, away from the mirror now. The lamps are dim. The scent of myrrh clings to the curtains. The diadem rests. Somewhere beyond the colonnade, the sea breathes in and out, and the city does the same. We'll visit another royal morning next time, someone less scented, more powdered, and absolutely overwhelmed by wigs. For now, close your eyes. Imagine the soft kohl line in the dark, patient as a horizon, and let the day down.